The other point I want to make is that the Horsemen did not draw just by our name only because we walked out there. There had to be somebody on the other side of the ring. And rest his soul, Dusty Rhodes was the catalyst for most of that time. He was the leader, but he was surrounded at that time by an incredible array of talent that we were fortunate enough to work with. I count Magnum, Terry Allen among them, and the Road Warriors, and Ronnie Garvin, and Sam Houston, and all the guys that we got to work with. We had the best across the ring that every night forced us to be the best that we could be, and so I think that was a contributing factor in our run. And when Terry had his accident, I remember it like it was yesterday. I mean, it was in the paper, and it was about a mile from his home in a pouring rain, and hit a slick spot in the road, lost control of his car, hit a tree, and in an instant, his neck was broken and his career was ended. And if there is one person, and not just because he's sitting here, but if there's one person who had an unlimited future as to where he was going to go, it's Terry Allen. He was destined for many of the things he's talked about, the dues that he paid, the style he developed, what he delivered when he was in the ring. He would have been a world champion. And I don't know if Tully remembers this, but you were in a battle for your life when that happened. It wasn't just your career that ended. And it was, well, is Terry even going to survive? And the doctor said because he was a magnificent athlete in such tremendous shape, that contributed to the fact that he did survive. And one night, Doug Dillinger, who was in charge of security, and it was well after midnight, snuck us into the back door of the hospital into an intensive care, which you couldn't get there, but we were able to get there. And we walked in, and there was Terry laying there face down on an apparatus with this thing that totally immobilized his head. And he, I'm sure, had no idea that we were there, and he was on a machine that rotated one way and the other so that his body fluids didn't settle. And you heard the phrase, you could hear a pin drop, well, you could have heard a pin drop. Nothing was said or needed to be said, because as we looked at him, praying that he recovered, it could have been one of us.
Yeah, that was a tragic, all our lives changed. I woke up the next morning and the news. We just finished a 8-month program, and business is booming and everything is looking great. And one of our key players was gone just like that. It was crazy, and we didn't spend a lot of time thinking, as JJ said, but we all drove fast, and we all had cars that could go fast, and it could have been any of us. And it was a day and a time and an era that you never forget. It marks your life.
And I don't know if you people know it, but Terry, he fought back and eventually was able to walk independently, which he can do short distances now. And he told me the other day that when they invented this device that's sitting over there, it changed the quality of his life because it allowed him to have mobility. He's married. He and I have something in common, that we're both fathers of twins, and he gets around on that device, and you people may not know it, but it's heavy, it's cumbersome, and unfortunately he can't fly with it on an airplane. And when Kyle Klingman invited him to come here, knowing that you people would be delighted to see him, that it involved Terry, and he brought his family with him to get in a car and drive from his home all the way across the country, and it took a week to come to Waterloo to be here to see you people.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And here, and the thing of it is we got to entertain you guys and put on some unbelievable battles of good and evil and all these things that we did that was made so many memories. But it's so ironic that Tully and I, and for me, being reminded so many times about the I Quit match, and no, he never said the word, so we'll just get that out right now.
But I named the book that way.
There you go, and it will still pay off. So, but the thing of it is so I inadvertently ended up in the I Quit match of life. Okay, so this guy who's been watched by hundreds of thousands of people on TV, he gets to play this hero and gets to do all these superhuman things. Got faced with a challenge, and whether I was going to buckle and crawl into my pity pot and become a statistic or not was certainly something that could have happened. Could happen really easily. But I made a mistake that day that I've never admitted. I've got to admit to everybody here. Well, I never prayed to God to take this away from me. I prayed for Him to give me the strength to do what I knew was going to be ahead of me, and He's been faithful. He's done that. But boy, have I paid for it. The battle goes on. It goes on every day like it does for each and every one of you and your challenges in life. I'm here to tell you, there is no quit in life. Life is a challenge, no matter what it is, your job, your family, your health, whatever it is, it's a challenge. And my quest was that if I could persevere, whether I had a platform, whether I was on TV, or no matter what I was, wherever we're at, we're an example. If it's at work, if it's with our friends, with our family, you're an example. You're teaching somebody how to react to the challenges in their own life. And if I could do anything, it'd give back to all the people that supported me as I entertained them, and literally the hundreds of thousands of letters I got while I was in the hospital. I wanted them to see that, that thing we lived by wasn't just something that sounded good. Tully got to where he got to be by hard work. Nobody gave it to him. Nobody gave it to me. I didn't come from somebody that I knew in the business that got me in, and I got down the road. We all worked super, super, unbelievably hard to do something we loved, but to be the best at it. And no matter what you do in life, it's the same thing. If you give 100%, at the end of the day, that's all you can do, is give 100% and never, ever, ever quit. And I'm not a quitter. Nobody's sitting up here with me as a quitter. None of you guys are quitters. And I want that message to be out there. Through God, all things are possible, 100%. But you've got to move. You can't stay parked. You can't just say, "Oh, poor pitiful me." You got to get up and go for it each and every day. Bad knees, bad backs, bad pains. Oh, poor pitiful me. Go. Get up and move. Do what you can do. And maybe it's not go climb a mountain, and maybe it's not to be able to go run a 4-minute mile or go pinch somebody in 30 seconds. But your accomplishments every day are just as important as all these things we're sitting up here talking about today. The things we did that were so memorable, and I'm glad we made those memories for you. But you're making memories today for yourself, for your families. So keep it up.
You want to go into detail on your feud with Magnum and your thoughts on the very unfortunate accident that happened to him?
When I look at that's probably the number one most talked about as far as my career and matches, and certainly Great American Bash with Rick, and some of the matches with Dusty, and of course the Road Warriors, the War Games. I mean, there's a lot of lot of fond memories I have. The best of 7 series with Magnum TA, I would say, have to say, is the number one most talked about or brought up by the fans the most. The best of 7 series with Magnum, and you know, the first of its kind ever at the time, and really the whole psychology behind it, the idea of a best of 7, and then the way we did it in terms of a contract signing and his mom there. You know, he never, for those who've never seen that clip, I know it's out there, he didn't smarten his mom up to the wrestling business at all. So she's at this contract signing. He knows what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. She didn't have a clue. And so as we're sitting there and Sandy Scott is kind of negotiating this back and forth, and of course the buzzword, the key word for him is when I call him a mama's boy. What, you some mama's boy? Is that, you know, that's his cue to come flying over the table. And he does. And then we're, you know, kind of, next thing you know, Ivan and I got him down, putting the boots to him. I mean, and his mom is like, I mean, she is like beside herself. She's like freaking out. Her mind's all real. And so to set it up that way, and then Bob Geigel to strip him of the title, and then to announce a best of 7 series was, I think, unprecedented at the time. And then to build it the way we did, 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, 3-1, 3-2, 3-3, and then 7th and final match. Once again in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Crockett, to his credit, dedicated the whole entire hour television, because he was going to tape it for television, and it was the whole hour of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. And it couldn't have worked out any better. It wasn't even planned this way, like with the camera angles and everything back then. They weren't as sophisticated as they are now. But to utilize the chain and for it to kind of slither out like a snake right in front of the cameras to where the referee didn't see that a chain was used. I mean, it all just fell into place. And of course the fans, oh my gosh, you want to talk about being livid. You know, here again, a Russian wearing the United States Heavyweight Championship was kind of unheard of, right? The idea of it. And I'm basing this on what fans told me over the years, feedback from fans, right?
Yeah.
And just because of how much they hated me. And then for him to have the accident, and at first I wasn't convinced when Dusty and Jimmy had just come back from a tour in Japan. We were in Philadelphia. I still remember it. They brought me in a little room, told me he had broke his neck. And it's wrestling, right? It's a work, right? you know, whatever. You know, no, it took them a few minutes to convince me. I'm like, oh my gosh, and they kind of settled in. Then they said, well, we've got something else we want to share with you. And then they presented the idea of the superpower. Well, we weren't calling it the superpowers that night, but the idea of teaming up with Dusty, and you know, to take some time, think about it. So they gave me the ultimate decision on it, whether I wanted to do it or not. And again, by fan accounts, that angle was so strong. And the way it was kayfabed from essentially everyone is what got it over even that much more. And I think what really the kind of the ice on the cake or the cherry on top was Bill Apter, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, did 2 things. One, he did a headshot of me on the magazine cover, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, with like tear coming, I cry for Magnum TA. And then he and I and Dusty did one interview, and that's where we announced the formulation of the superpowers. And between that interview and that magazine cover and the angle that night, and again in Charlotte, I've had a lot of wow, my turn happened in Charlotte. Number 7, best of 7 happened in Charlotte. The Great American Bash against Flair was in Charlotte. Charlotte's a special place for me.
You were there in the NWA Crockett territory when Magnum TA had his accident. You were actually involved in an angle with him and Nikita. Could you talk to us about what it was like for the whole territory when a guy like that, who I understand was well liked and about to get an even bigger push, possibly a future world champion, had that kind of tragic accident?
Yep, definitely. You know, in that territory, in Crockett's territory, every single person in that territory, um, they were incredible wrestlers. I mean, from the bottom of the card could have been a main event, you know. And what was kind of nice about the territory, it did kind of switch around and rotate, you know, the matches you had, you know, except for, you know, Flair and Dusty, you know, a couple of the big time baby faces, they were never going to be on the opening cards. But, you know, other main events would, you know, win titles, lose titles, then go back down and end up being opening matches again and work your way up and find another angle and get up there. And the whole territory was kind of like that. But now Magnum TA, he was, in fact, in Mid-South, I was with him there, and that's when I first met him. And Magnum was an unbelievable guy, and you know, good looking, young guy, good body, had a good promo, and he could work. And he would do anything that anybody wanted him to do in matches. Um, but by the time he got up to Crockett's territory, he really learned how to become a top baby face. And him and Dusty were good friends. So Dusty was grooming him to be the big champion. And it's really hard to get into a position like that. And because there's a lot that's asked for you. I mean, you have to be the champion, a single champion in a territory. You have to, you know, you have to be greedy. You have to be selfish. You can't you can't be in a match with somebody and not be the top guy. And so you really have to look out for yourself. And Magnum was finally at that point to where he was really groomed and knew what he was doing. And it ended up being where we were going to do an angle with him, and it was going to be to where Magnum and Nikita were going to end up having single matches. And I think, you know, and it's hard to remember every angle that you do and everything, but I can't remember what town we were in, but Magnum ended up getting in a car accident, and I didn't hear about it until the next morning. But I couldn't believe it because I was really good friends with Magnum, and it ended up being where he wasn't ever going to be able to wrestle again. And in that territory, because of the way the territory was, where everybody got to work with pretty much everybody, you got to be really good friends with people. And it wasn't just like it was, you know, you wrestle a guy and, you know, that was the end of it. You never talked to him much again or anything. This is where you traveled. You were, you know, you'd be at parties together, you know, kayfabe, of course. But, you know, the wives were friends with everybody and the guys were friends. And so when Magnum got hurt, I mean, it was devastating to the whole company because, you know, it was something where it could have been me. It could have been Ivan and Nikita or anybody in the territory. It could have been Rick, where he went off the road and got hurt like that. So it really hit home for everybody. And it was almost like, you know, hey, we got to start really watching out for ourselves and taking care of ourselves a little bit more because you don't know when your last day in this ring's going to be. So it was pretty devastating to the whole territory, and you know, well, you know, devastating to Magnum too, but it was pretty brutal.
There was so much heat, there was so much back and forth. We did the deal where I dressed up as a security guard and handed the roll of quarters to Tully. Then the following week, Magnum came out in the police outfit and handcuffed me to the rope, and then got Tully, and it was just perfect. It worked out. I mean, it was, there was no better storytelling than right then. It was good.
What did you think of the whole I Quit match that people still talk about to this day?
Perfect. I mean, if there was a perfect wrestling match, if there was a perfect build up to a whole scenario, to a whole angle, it was right then, because the whole match made sense. Everybody had a part. Like, if I wasn't in it, it wouldn't have mattered as much. If Tully had worked with anyone else, it wouldn't have worked. The heat that they had between the two of them, because they didn't like each other back then, in and out of the ring, the animosity that they had, they were each trying to be the best and be the star in Dusty's eyes. And just the everything just made sense. There's not a part of that match that goes, oh, they missed that, or that didn't make sense, or why did they do that. It's perfect. The whole buildup of it, it's just, I mean, if there was one of the best wrestling matches ever, that would be it.
Did you find it strange that Magnum ended up marrying Tully's ex?
Yes. Yep, that was kind of wild, especially like hearing the whole story of like how it happened, and the whole, like, it certainly worked out for Tessa. I mean, Tessa's got two awesome dads, and it's certainly playing well with her career and where she's wanting to go with her life. It seems kind of weird, but for everyone, I think it all worked out. I mean, you can't say that, oh, you can't do that, it's not gonna, it's not right. But then it did work. So who are we to judge? And everybody's happy, and Magnum's got two beautiful children out of it, and Courtney's happy, and Tully's happy, and all the kids are happy. So, stranger things have happened, but I can't tell you what.
How did it end up happening? Like, was the relationship already over, I guess, by the time that she switched?
I'm not. I wasn't around, so I'm not quite sure the whole, like, how it worked out. But I think Tully found out that she was dating Magnum when she had Magnum tattooed on her ankle.
Oh boy. And now, of course, I've seen Tully and Magnum together, and I guess ever since the accident, whatever heat they had probably vanished.
Oh, I don't know. I think there was still a lot of heat after the accident, because that's, a lot of stuff happened after that. I think that through time, and time has a way of healing all wounds. And, if you just have to realize that people go different directions, they may not go the direction that they want you to, especially after a divorce. But, Magnum's good to Tully's kids, and Tully should be happy with that. And it all works out. So,
Do you think the Magnum heat may have had something to do with why Tully never came back to WCW, other than I think one appearance after his WWE run?
um, I think maybe like being busted for the drugs, like testing positive for the cocaine, put a lot of damper on a lot of that, because at that time it was, um, you know, it was nothing to do it, but then you just don't get caught until he got caught.
And what was your reaction to Magnum's accident?
We were actually in Kansas City at the time and got the phone call, and it was one of those moments in your life that you just can't believe what happened, and especially can't believe that it happened to Magnum, and that you're thankful that he survived, but then you're also worried about, like, what is his life going to be like after that, especially when we heard how bad the accident was. Like, what was his life going to be after that? And I'm so thankful, that he persevered, and that they had put the collar on him, where they drill your head, and keep you immobile. And he was like, no, we didn't want that. He said, like every day he would just like push his head against the pillow just as hard as he could, because he didn't want to be just completely, immobile. And he says every day it just felt like he got a little bit further. And he says that nobody could tell, but he could tell. But he just kept pushing his head against that pillow. And then got to where he could lift up his head, and then he could sit up. And it was like the little baby steps and the accomplishments that he did that made him go further than anybody. That all the doctors said that he wasn't ever going to be able to walk, and he proved them all wrong. And now he's out riding four-wheelers with his kids and having a great time.
You're most remembered as a singles wrestler from that period of time for your matches against Magnum TA, which everyone still talks about to this day. What do you think made you guys click so well together?
Well, I think that you talk. You've got two people that want to strive for excellence. You've got two people that are driven. You've got two people that had tremendous intensity, and I mean, it was just easy for us. I mean, he wanted to be the very best babyface. I wanted to be the very best heel that had ever been in the business, and you're striving to do that, and the intensity of the rivalry and the involvement of being the U.S. champion, and there was just great chemistry there that people got to view great matches every night someplace in the country for 8 months, and it was wonderful.
And everyone talks about the I Quit match. I think that was one of the first actually big-time publicized I Quit matches, because it was before the Terry Funk Ric Flair one took place. But whose idea was it to have that I Quit match in the cage? Do you recall?
Probably Dusty's. I mean, I don't remember. I mean, that was, we
Many years ago.
they set that out, and where we were going to go, and wasn't hard for me. Starrcade was going to sell out and be great, so.
How did Magnum TA end up marrying your ex-wife? Because it just seems...
You'd have to ask them that.
Yeah. It's interesting that you were like his biggest rival, and that ended up happening. This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and I'm with legendary NWA wrestler Magnum TA. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing great. I am so looking forward to this year winding down, and looking forward to the holidays, and I couldn't be any better.
Well, I'll jump right into it. I know you were an athlete growing up. How did you end up becoming a professional wrestler?
Well, I was going to college wrestling in collegiate world, and this was back in 1979. And about the time I had these great aspirations of being an Olympic wrestler. Dan Gable was my hero growing up. And that was the same year that something going on in the world of the U.S. Boycotted the Olympics. So the moon and stars weren't lining up well in that aspect. And I was working security while I was going to college in bars in Virginia Beach, one called Rogues and one called Peabody's. And several of the wrestlers were coming into the club where I was working. And I started talking to them, and the light bulb started going off. I started seeing the opportunity of what a profitable living somebody could make in that endeavor. And so I just started changing my mindset and seeing what I needed to do to continue expanding my physical capabilities, and then taking a shot at making it in the big leagues.
As far as your training for professional wrestling, who trained you and how difficult was the training in those days?
So that's interesting. So I had no like wrestling school or formal wrestling training like so many have those stories. I came to be friends with a fellow named Buzz Sawyer, and everybody's probably very familiar with the Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer, and he was wrestling tag teaming with Matt Bourne in the Mid Atlantic area where I'm kind of from. I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, and Buzz, uh, long story that I really don't even want to delve into out of respect for the past and the deceased. But Buzz ended up being the guy to break me in. But my training consisted of 2 hours in the ring in up in Portland, Oregon, in Don Owens territory, with Buzz and Princess Victoria, was from the Pacific Northwest. And we worked out in the ring for about 2 hours. Buzz showed me how to hit the ropes, grab a headlock, take a tackle, uh, do an arm drag, do a couple moves. And then the very next day, I wrestled Buzz on live television for Don Owens. Unbeknownst to me, Buzz had told Don that I had been working for 6 months down in Louisiana for Bill Watts, which I had been down in Louisiana, but I hadn't been wrestling. I hadn't been in a wrestling ring yet, and Don never checked it out. And so I had one day of training, and then I was booked 7 days a week from then on out, and learned everything I learned about the wrestling business live in the ring. Working up and down the road.
So I guess that first match against Buzz, you would have done mostly amateur wrestling stuff to not expose you too much.
Actually, we did the headlocks and the tackles and the hip tosses and all the little spots that he'd showed me the day before. And then after that, it was tough because I didn't even know the jargon and the lingo. Somebody said one tackle, drop down, get it again. I didn't even really, I couldn't process all that. But to put it in perspective for you, the Barbarian was breaking in at the same time and was in that territory, and he was just as green as I was. And I had lots of matches with him and guys like Lord Alfred Hayes and Matt Bourne was there, and just a plethora of talent. And I just absorbed everything I could like a sponge to try to learn and try to get the grasp of what was going on. And I was in a crash course of learning for 6 months in that territory.
It's amazing that the Barbarian is still wrestling today and still looks fairly similar to how he looked back then.
Well, it's his great Samoan genetics is what it is. And he was a beast when I met him, and he's still a beast today at 60 years old. So, yeah, it's a testament to what they turn out there on that island.
Did you ever see him in action in one of his bar altercations after he got some alcohol in him?
No, I was I heard the stories. I was with Dusty when they had to send his mama send the wife out to California to pick him up after one of his escapades out on the West Coast. But I was fortunate enough never to see the Barbarian really in his full glory in alcohol induced mayhem, so to speak.
I haven't heard too much bad about Don Owens' territory up in Portland. How was your experience overall there, and what was your most memorable feud up there?
Well, to be honest, I really was doing nothing but working, at the bottom of the card. Playboy Buddy Rose was there, and Jay Youngblood was in the territory, and it's really kind of a vague remembrance because I was so green what I was doing. I mean, I would go to Jesse Bar when in his towns and help him set the ring up. I would do anything that it took to get experience. Some nights I'd work the first match with somebody and do a 15-minute babyface Broadway, and then go put a referee shirt on and referee 2 or 3 matches. So I was doing everything I could to learn every aspect I could in this crash course, about the business. Because again, I hadn't had 2 weeks of training prior to this, much less what a lot of people went through, and it was absolutely miraculous that I was able to do what I did and not kill somebody in the process. One of my stories, Gene Kaninsky, former world's heavyweight champion, and I worked in Seattle, and Gene picks me up, drops me behind him, and tells me to roll him up. And I don't know what a roll up is. And I belly to back suplexed him on his head because I just had to think of something to do. And he was such a big, rough, tough, rugged guy. He just laughed about it afterwards. He didn't have any idea how green I was. But I mean, those were the kind of things that I did over that 6 month period of time. But again, it was 7 days a week. So I came out of there with 180 matches under my belt that in today's time would be more than most people get to work in a year. So it was baptism by fire, but nonetheless, Don was a fair man. The payouts were fair, and I can't say enough good things about him. I got to see Don back at the NWA convention later on in my career when I made it to the top, and I can't say enough good things about the man.
I understand that it was Andre the Giant that gave you the Magnum TA name. How did that come about?
So when I was in Portland and working there, breaking in, Andre came to town. Well, whoever had the biggest car drove Andre around, and I had this big Olds 98 4-door monster car that he could fit in. So we drove around, got to know each other, kind of formed a friendship. My first 2 months in the business, and then fast forward to 1982. Broke in 80, started in 80. 1982, 82 and a half, I'm in championship wrestling in Florida. Andre comes in. Now I'm a little seasoned. I've been, I've had a lot of ring time, a lot of matches, and I'm starting to be somebody it's hard not to notice. And so Andre says to me over breakfast one morning, he said, "You look very similar characteristics to that Magnum PI guy on that television series." He said, "You need a name that people can remember, something they can associate with." He said, "You should be Magnum TA." So he was working for Vince Sr. at the time. He was getting ready to go back up to New York, and he was going to pitch the idea to Vince and bring me to New York as Magnum TA. But before that could happen, Paul Orndorff made the jump from Mid South to go to New York, and Ernie Ladd was booking for Bill. He gives me a call in the middle of the night, says, "Hey, there's a spot open here on top. If you want it, it's yours." And so I ran with it. Went to work for Bill, and that's where I took off the Magnum TA name.
How was that territory for you? I understand the money was good and the travel was very hard and the matches themselves were very hard hitting.
Bill came from the Eddie Graham, school of, psychology and wrestling and credibility. And so, he wanted everything to be as hard hitting, as solid, as believable, as attuned to a wrestling contest as it could be depicted. And he was very much had that ingrained in his DNA, and anybody that spent any serious amount of time with him, rubbed off on. I mean, Bill's the one that taught me how to throw a punch. Up into that part of my career, I don't even like throwing forearms and whatnot, and he taught me how to throw a punch. It was like a Bill Watts punch. It was stiff. It looked good, but it was stiff. There's no way you could see through it. And I learned a lot. I call my time at Mid South my graduate school work of my career, because it was the first opportunity to work on top and to do main event angles and get a lot of mic time and get to do the kinds of things you have to do to be a main eventer and to take on the responsibility helping to draw big main event money, and it was under his tutelage and Bill Dundee, who came in as the booker, that I learned what it takes to be a big money ball player, in our industry.
Who were some of the wrestlers you feuded with while you were in that territory?
So when I started out, they tagged right off the bat. They tagged Jim Duggan and I together, and we had countless tag team matches with like Ted DiBiase and oh goodness, I can't even think of all the names right now. Jim the Anvil Neidhart was there, and we had the tag team thing that was just kind of a traditional wrestling type feuds, and I went round and round with Hacksaw Butch Reed. He was the North American Heavyweight Champion, chasing him for that championship. But when Bill Dundee came in, he's the one that helped pop the territory and take this cast of characters, this young Magnum TA, and turn that into a feud with Mr. Wrestling 2, and bring in the Midnight Express, who we put heat on them to the moon, and set them up to have a tremendous run with the Rock and Roll Express. Again, Ted DiBiase was there, Steve Dr. Death Williams was there, Barry Darso, Rick Rude. I mean, there was just talent, so deep in the territory. And every night, we had hard hitting, believable, wrestling contests, and they were selling out all their venues at the time. For the last year I was there, I mean, a small venue like Houma, Louisiana, or Lafayette, and we were averaging $20,000 a night in those buildings, and the territory was on fire. Bill, I'm sure that was his the heyday of his run as a promoter in that Mid-South.
I know you were usually a baby face, but I understand there was a lot of fan attack incidents in that territory. Were you ever in the ring when either a riot occurred or you witnessed a scary situation with a heel?
I never did. I heard those stories, and I know they're true because I mean JYD, told me countless stories like that. I've seen the kind of heat that could have erupted into that. I was in New Orleans the night that Wrestling 2 turned heel on Dog and screwed him out of the North American Heavyweight title that Dog was holding at the time, and so I see how serious they could be. I mean, I heard the story of guys pulling knives on guys and cutting them, going to and from, and having riots where the police had to barricade the doors to keep the fans from getting back there to get to the heels. I mean, they were very serious about their wrestling, and when you mix that Cajun flavor to those kind of fans, like in Baton Rouge and some of those towns down there along the coast, you had a real recipe for something volatile if you didn't give them what they wanted.
And as far as the Florida territory, you mentioned earlier, Eddie Graham was a genius as far as booking. How was your experience working down there, and who were some of the bookers at the time? Because I know Eddie often had Mike, Dusty, and Kevin Sullivan helping out.
So I was working for Joe Blandard in San Antonio. Mike Graham comes in as the junior world's heavyweight champion for a guest spot, and him and I hit it off and have this like immediate bond. And again, I've been in the business like 1 year at this point. Mike goes home, tells his dad about me, gives me a call, said, "We want you to come to Florida." I go to Tampa, and I get there. Dory Funk Jr. was the booker, and territory was doing so, but I got to travel with Eddie and Mike every day for the first 6 months. And I stood in the back with Eddie watching the matches and him telling me what was good, what wasn't good, taught me the difference in selling, registering, dying, what a babyface needed to do, all the things you need to do to establish yourself and tell a story in the wrestling profession. So with somebody like that in your ear every night is just the value of that you can't even put a number on. And 6 months into that journey, Dory leaves, and in comes this charismatic guy that I've never met before in my life, American Dream Dusty Rhodes. Dusty and I had never met. We make a couple of road trips together, and next thing you know, we're like tied at the hip. And Dusty then gives me a whole different education. Now all of a sudden, besides just the scientific and hard hitting and all the things that Eddie, preached and talked about in angles and those kind of things, I got this very charismatic view of somebody else with different types of psychology. And it was magical to see the things Dusty could do to manipulate a crowd, and just all those kind of things. So on the heel side, yes, we had Kevin Sullivan, we had Angela Mosca, we had Mark Lewin, and just Bobby Duncan, all these guys that were just incredible. Jake the Snake Roberts, and I got to work with all these guys, and I got to get a lot of ring time because Dusty gave me the opportunity, but knew I needed polish and ring time and work. Tagged me up with Brad Armstrong and with Scott McGee, and we were tag team champions. But we'd go out there and wrestle 30 minutes every night with whoever the challenger was. So I was getting a crash course in psychology and learning, how important the interviews were, tapping into your charisma, learning how to relate to the audience on a different level. And again, it was a priceless education and experience I was getting in such a short period of time that some people would have taken 10 years to get to experience the things I got in the first two.
You mentioned you worked for Joe Blanchard. There's a lot of Texas wrestling fans on this channel. I was wondering if you could share some of your memories of wrestling in Texas.
Well, I loved it out there. I love the culture. I love the food. I loved everything about it, except for the fact that I was just an underneath guy trying to learn my way, trying to learn the craft, trying to figure it all out. One of my big takeaways from that point in my career, I've been in the business 6 months, and so I'm modeling myself out of people that I can somehow relate to. And I was watching the Road Warriors and what they were doing, and I just thought that was so cool. So like they were this bigger than life, freaks of nature. And Ray Hernandez had just come into the territory and brought with him a grocery bag about yay tall, full of performance enhancing vitamins, you might say, and from Florida. And him and I start working out together, training together, and I'm determined I'm going to be 300 pounds. And I got up to about 270 in about 2 months of working out with Ray from 230 where I started. And I walk into this dressing room one night, and Bruiser Brody was in town, and he looks at me and said, "Kid, you're looking great." He said, "You look like $1 million." He said, "But I want to give you a little bit of advice. If you want to make it big in this business, don't do it just based on what you look like and something that you can't maintain year round. Learn your craft, learn the skill sets, learn the mic work, and find a place physically that you can maintain 12 months out of the year and be healthy." And a light bulb went off because I realized I was like gaining weight. I was turning myself into a monster, yet I could tell it was pulling down. My cardiovascular wasn't as good. My endurance wasn't as good. And I said, I'm going to find a happy medium somewhere where I can find the good shape for myself, but try to be the best skill set that I can possibly be. Because even from the day one, I had this goal in my mind that I one day wanted to be the best. I wanted to be a world champion and recognized for my in the ring work. And Brody turned my whole ship around while I was there, and I never looked back. I shied away from the performance enhancing drugs. I shied away from anything other than being best technician and student of the game that I could be.
So some people talk about Bruiser Brody as if he was a bully and out for himself, but in your experience, he was actually helpful to you as a green wrestler.
He, knowingly or unknowingly, had one of the most dramatic effects on me anybody can have. And then later on, when I went from working for Joe to Florida Championship Wrestling, he and Stan came in, and I didn't know anything about their reputations or them being rough with people in the ring because I worked pretty snug, and I thought that's the way you were supposed to work from the beginning. That's just the way I worked. So when they came to Florida, they had the battle royals going all around the loop, and it's so funny. Stan and Bruiser both would only they'd let me throw them out of the ring, and they didn't want anybody else to touch them. They didn't even want to deal with anybody else. So they were like somehow took some uh, liking to me early on, and I never had one bad experience with either one of those guys.
You mentioned about your size at one point getting close to 300. The fans on here always like to know your best ever squat, bench press, and deadlift.
So I didn't max when I was at my biggest. When I was in my best shape at 240, I could do reps with 405 on the bench. I could incline 405. I could do seated militaries with 275. I had a lot of shoulder and back strength, and I had a lot of lower back strength when I was 167 pounds in high school wrestling. I could deadlift 450, and I have to think that at 240, I probably could deadlift quite a bit because that's where the belly to belly came from. I realized early on in my career that if I can waist lock anybody, if I could get my hands around them, I could suplex them whether they wanted to go or didn't want to go. And that's where the belly to belly suplex ended up being my finish because I realized early on if you ever got the chance to be a star and work on top, you had to have a finish that you could do to a seasoned veteran, with him working with you, or some underneath green guy that maybe, didn't know a wristwatch from a wrist lock. And so I had some pretty serious back and upper body strength that was all geared towards keeping me strong because I wasn't trying to be a bodybuilder, but I did want to be strong and be able to handle myself in the ring and to move bodies around and do the things that we had to do to portray the contest that we did.
When would have been the first time you met Ric Flair?
I met Ric Flair for the first time on Mike Graham's boat in Tampa, Florida. Uh, he came in to the territory. He was a champion. He was dating Beth then. They weren't even married yet, and we all went out boating out in the Tampa Bay on Mike's offshore race boat and spent the day. And so we met back then. We never were. We weren't in the ring together. Anything like that. My first in the ring meeting with him was when I was the North American champion for Bill, and we wrestled. I believe it was Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that match and that timing, I think, was some of the precursors to me coming to work for the Crockett's.
As far as his daughter Charlotte, have you seen much of her?
I've known Charlotte since she was 3 years old, and every time I've seen her, I saw her as a teenager and as a college student, at her mom and dad's house here in Charlotte, at Christmas parties and things, and talked to her, and I've seen her on a handful of occasions since she broke into the business. The last time I really got to spend a significant amount of time with her was at her brother's funeral, which obviously was, terribly, sad, traumatic time. But I followed her and stayed in touch with her, and so proud of the career that she's had for herself so far, and I'm sure the best best of her still yet to come. I mean, she's been off this last year, rehabbing from some surgeries. I think she's going to definitely make a mark that'll be maybe not that of which her father did, because that's just a hard mark to follow. But certainly as an athlete and a performer, she's second to none.
The dream match for a lot of wrestling fans would be Charlotte versus your stepdaughter, Tessa. Do you think there's a chance of that ever happening in WWE?
I think there's always a chance of something of that magnitude happening, because they're business people, and Tessa is got a special, unique charisma about her that gives her that it factor. And she's been out of the mainstream with the virus stuff shutting the world down and everything for the last 8-9 months. But she's also been training like an absolute beast, where she's living down in Tijuana, Mexico, in CrossFit training and still working out in the ring. But she's absolutely the best physical shape of her life, and only getting in better physical shape. So she's 25 years old. I've got to think sometime in the next 12 to 18 months, we see that being a possible reality.
I know you had a hand in her training. What aspects of her training did you help her with when she was learning the ropes?
Well, to be honest, she trained with George South here in Charlotte for months before she ever let either myself or her dad, Tully, know what she was doing. She like most young kids and teenagers, went through her little wild child, spree in her late teens, and it and kind of found her way to the wrestling door of George to try that out, because she'd gone to the Hall of Fame ceremony with her dad when he was inducted, and I think the seed was kind of planted in the back of her brain then. But after she worked out for a while, I went and watched her work. I watched her in the ring, and I told her then, I said, you're really not that good yet. I said, but you have that it factor that you can't buy and you can't learn. You've got that thing that's undeniable. And I said, so what you've got to do is just work harder than anybody around you, and get to the highest level your physical game can be each and every day, so that you can capitalize on that, because it takes time to learn what to do with that thing. And especially in today's time, where they can't go up and down the road and wrestle 7 days a week like we did back in the days when we were coming into business. And they've got a social media tool in their belt that they're able to capitalize on, and other things. But still, when push comes down to shove, when the bell rings, you've got to be able to perform bell time to meet the hype. And she has really brought her skill sets up amazing over the really short number of years that she's been in the business. I mean, it's 5 years technically, but if you put all that in a bucket, it wouldn't amount to what we used to be able to do in 1 year. But she's doing some great things, and I think Tessa has got a lot to offer, and I think she's going to make some noise.
Without getting into it too much, there was some controversy when they made her the men's champion of Impact Wrestling. Then, from what I understand, it had something to do with the coronavirus, why she didn't come back and drop the title before her contract. And
well,
side to it, because she hasn't really spoke about it. We've only ever heard Impact's side of it, and they've been known to spin the truth in some other cases. So I was just wondering.
Well, I knew from the moment they came up with the idea of making her this intergender, now the world's heavyweight champion, that they were going down a dangerous path. And they came to our home here in Charlotte and filmed a special with her mom and I about it. And And I support Tessa because she's my stepdaughter, but I'm not a big fan of that portrayal of men and women in the ring. Not because women aren't capable or anything else. It's just I don't ever like anything that depicts a man being physically violent with a woman. I mean, I've got a young daughter that's 13 years old, and whether today they know it's all a work or not, is still not a portrayal that I'm real comfortable with. So I told her that I knew that she'd reached the pinnacle of what could do with that organization. Of course, we didn't know this virus was going to come along, and the fact of the matter is they had wanted her to extend her contract and do different things, and the 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 opportunity that experience with Impact afforded her was a step in her growth in what she was doing. But she needed to move on from that. So because she hadn't extended that contract, they were paying her, peanuts for one thing. But on top of that, she had met all the contractual dates that she needed to meet. So all I told her was, "Hey, yeah, we want you to work one more shot." I offered her up the psychology. I said, take whatever their top paid guy is and figure out what that would equate to in 1 month's salary, and say, hey, if you want me to come in and do this, since I've met my contractual obligation, this is what it would take for me to come do it. And it wasn't a ridiculous amount of money as was rumored on the internet. It was just, hey, this, if we're going to extend it for the equivalent of what you're paying your top guy. And they didn't want to do it. And that's really the truth.
So, in other words, they put themselves in that situation.
Over money. Yeah.
Now, as far as going to the Crockett territory, how did that whole situation come about? We know you were friends with Dusty and Flair. I assume they had some pull there at that time.
They did, and Dusty and I were more than business friends. We were like he was like a brother I never had, and Dusty had gone to the Crockett's, and I was working on top for Bill, and our territory was on fire. And so when Dusty left Florida to go, take the book of Crockett's, he takes Barry Windham with him to be, Joe Namath, be the star, be the the name to the brand to lead the company. And the territory was on its rear end. I mean, top guys were making, $500-600 a week, and you can't run up and down the road 7 days a week and only make $500-600 and pay your bills and your expenses and everything. It just, the math doesn't work. So Barry was very, very businessman minded in his head, but his friendship with Dusty put him in a awkward position, I guess. And rather than just say, "Hey, I need to work a notice and leave," evidently Barry just upped it and left kind of unceremoniously with everybody with no plan B. So Dusty and Jimmy Crockett called me in the middle of the night one night while I'm there in Louisiana, and says, "Hey, this is what's happened. I know you're on top. I know you're in a six-figure position, and we can't." And Jimmy got on the phone. He said, "I can't guarantee you six figures, but what I can guarantee you that if you come here, we will put our whole force behind you and push you like you've never been pushed, and give you the opportunity to be the biggest star that we've ever had." And because I believed in Dusty, and it was a chance to come back full circle, because I'm from Virginia, it'd be an opportunity to wrestle in front of my family and all the people that I'd grown up with, and have an opportunity to be on top and utilize the skills that I've culminated over the last 5 years, and get that chance to really be the world's heavyweight champion like I'd always endeavored to be.
And one of the first people you feuded with there, from what I understand, was Wahoo McDaniel, who was quite an interesting character. What was it like being in the ring with him? I heard he was very hard hitting, to say the least.
He was right down my alley because here I've just come from a year and a half with Bill Watts, who, if you don't lay it in, or if you do anything that you can remotely see through, he'll either find you or fire you or just blackball you something, because he is so, intense of a guy. So, I mean, I'm pretty rough, rugged, babyface guy. And I work solid, and I'm not afraid to, I would take as good as I gave. And so yeah, I laid it in pretty good too. So when Wahoo would hit me with those big, meat cleaver chops is and all those kind of things, I was right at home. And it to me, uh, growing up watching Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling, I'd watched him and Johnny Valentine feud over the big bowl of silver dollars, the goldfish bowl full of silver dollars, that beat each other to death. So it was like an honor for me to step in with this guy that to me was legend. And when he eventually passed the U.S. title to me in a cage match in a sold out Charlotte Coliseum, which was his home base, and puts me over right in the middle, 1, 2, 3, with a belly to belly suplex, no slip on a banana peel, no out, no nothing, nothing but respect for that man. I mean, I've told that story 100 times if I've told it once. The greatest single victory in having my hand raised in front of a sold out crowd was that night with Wahoo.
And I understand from talking to Kamala before he passed, the match that you had with him at the Great American Bash, I guess he didn't want to lose because there was no future for him in the territory, and they wanted to put you over, obviously, because of the big push. Were you experiencing any of that, those problems with the booking backstage before that match, or did you just go in there and wrestle and get the finish like it was just a regular match?
Yeah, to me, it really was irrelevant. I learned from from Bill and from Eddie Graham. I could get myself over whether I had my hand raised or I didn't have my hand raised, whatever. The story I told during the match is what made me believable to the people, made the people want to be behind me. So whether I got a clean win on somebody or whatever, it was the contest that we portrayed and how the battle played out, which was kept my fan base growing. I remember, so yeah, I remember the deal, and Kamal was going to go to New York, I think, and so he didn't want to do the favor right in the middle of the ring. But we gave the fans the pop. We got a DQ, but then I throw them in the ropes and belly to belly them, and the whole 16,000 people are chanting 1, 2, 3. So we gave them the pop. We gave them everything they wanted. The win with a suplex was really irrelevant. The only other guy that there was ever an issue with was Bill Eadie, because he was a mass superstar and a big star here in Mid Atlantic, and he'd come in to work a shot or do something, and Dusty wanted him to do the favor, and he didn't want to because he felt like he still had potential to come back, maybe at some point in time, and didn't want to, and thought it would somehow be a disservice to him or whatever. And it didn't hurt my feelings any. I mean, probably pissed Dusty off, or maybe Jimmy, but and we worked some DQ or something. But I mean, I was in the ring with the best of them, and before I got my push, I put over everybody and anybody on the planet. And when I left Bill in Mid South, and when I'd been on top, I gave my notice and worked for 6 weeks, a 6 week notice, not a 2 day, not a 2 week. I worked 6 weeks and did the favor for every single person in that territory that had been putting me over for the last year and a half. I mean, that's just the way we did business back then. I mean, it was a work, and we would never, have got over without each other contributing.
How important was kayfabe back in those days? I know Bill Watts was very strict on it. I'm not sure how strict Crockett was, but I'm sure he was fairly strict as well.
Well, Bill, hands down. I mean, no heels and baby faces were, on the same side of the building dressing, never traveling together, never allowed to, be out in public together. That just, that wasn't tolerated. In Crockett's, it was the same way, but it was such a bigger machine. At our peak, we had 200 people working for the Crockett's, all living in Charlotte. So, like Flair was like back and forth between a baby face and a heel. So he could kind of associate back and forth. But like Tully and I, or Arn and I, Nikita and I, we were all always on polar opposites of any type of outside to the public's eye situation, always. And yeah, kayfabe was big to the point where they wanted to shoot angles where we actually ended up getting arrested from hiding in public and stuff like that just to further an angle. So yeah, it was pretty seriously held as the holy grail of how to protect the business. Even in the mid '80s.
I heard that they did some angles too with like Ricky Morton and Ricky Steamboat where they'd sandpaper someone's face just so when they're walking around, they would look like they were legitimately beat up. Did they ever do that to you?
Oh no, they didn't do it to me. I did it to myself because I'm just such a you can't tell me anything I can't do, and hardcore guy. We did the angle where the Andersons had jumped me, had done something, and were supposed to have like plowed my head across the carpet. And I took a towel and friction burned the whole side of my face like in a big half moon. And it looked horrible, absolutely horrible. And on top of that, it hurt worse than anything afterwards. Not when I did it, but afterwards, I've never had such pain from anything in my life. It just was like somebody had taken a blowtorch to my face, and I did it to myself. So yeah, I can relate to it.
And you worked a lot of the territories where there was said to be a lot of groupies back in those days. I don't know if you were married when you were on top in those days, but how was it compared to now where you don't see as much of the screaming girls everywhere?
There was I didn't know so many women existed. Uh, to be frank, I mean it was if there had been cell phones in the '80s, we would have all either been divorced, shot, or locked up. It was just absolute insanity. We were in a different town every day. We were flying on jet planes that the company owned, and we still weren't coming back. We were just hopscotching all over the country on planes, and I mean there was women in every port throwing themselves at you everywhere you went, 7 days a week, sometimes 3-4 times a day.
What do you think it would take to bring wrestling back to that? Because it just doesn't seem like it's like that anymore.
You can't. You're never going to. I mean, first of all, everything evolves, it changes. It's just like watching. I grew up watching John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, westerns that mesmerized me back in the day. I probably couldn't get my 13-year-old son to sit and watch 15 minutes of any of those programs because it's a different culture, it's a different time. Uh, to create the insanity that we were able to create and the emotion from fans and women and old people, young people, everything, the kayfabe part of it and the illusion that we were able to create and make people, question the entertainment they were seeing. They thought they were seeing, something that they were living vicariously through. And it was this, live in the round soap opera that we were portraying every night. And the emotional investment was so high because of that. When it all just became entertainment and like watching a movie or watching a sitcom where it's not real, it took that magic away. And I don't, today there's probably some of the greatest athletes I've ever seen doing things that are, unthinkable, but they're so unrealistic that, they don't have the effect. When you watch Brock Lesnar, suplex, somebody 15 times and yet nothing, but yet they won't get up and walk out. And this is a guy that's legitimately one of the biggest badasses on the planet. I think to myself, well, if I'm watching this and I see this guy 30 years ago that when he hit this move, nobody got up. I'm thinking, well, that big bad looking guy must not know how to do it right. So the effectiveness and the result of doing all these high flying maneuvers and all these spectacular stuntman looking things, if they can't bust a wet paper bag in somebody's imagination of, they could have really just killed somebody, then you lose something. And it just becomes like what we used to joke about Japanese style wrestling or lucha style wrestling, that it's just a bunch of, high spot, high spot, high spot, high spot that doesn't mean anything. That's what it evolved into. Only bigger guys doing it. Mick Foley jumping off the top of a steel cage, or guys doing moonsaults off of 20-foot tall cages and all these things. But they high spotted the business to death, just like we used to say. Somebody came in and hot shotted the territory and then left. So they did all this crazy crap, then they left the territory to try to pick up the pieces. Well, they did that on a global standpoint today. And so now trying to convince somebody that, they should appreciate the athleticism that this is taking to portray, when they say, oh, it's scripted, and oh, they know every move they're going to do before they step in the ring, that makes it kind of a hard sell.
Now, one of the greatest wrestling feuds of all time that people still talk about today, all these decades later, is you versus Tully Blanchard. Could you discuss that feud that, of course, Baby Doll also was involved with?
Sure. And from the time I met Tully, I was green. I was 6 months in the business, and Tully says to me that he wants to be the best heel in the country. That's his goal. That's what he's aspiring to be, the greatest heel. He didn't ever have any desire to be a babyface. He wasn't looking for the glory. He wanted to be the hardest worker, the most in shape, to get the most heat, and to be able to and do it better than anybody else. And when he and I hooked back up when I came to the Mid Atlantic, now my skill set had come up to a different level, and my intensity and my goal as a babyface was just as intense as his as a heel. So when you combine those two work ethics, and neither one trying to step on the other, neither one really wanting to be in the other one's role, then you've got this combination that's really, really hard to beat. So Tully and I worked an 8-month program to get to the culmination of that I Quit match. And of course, I don't even think you could work an 8-month program, or you can't hardly work an 8-minute program, much less an 8-month program. But we took that battle and all the back and forth things that led up to that match, all around the United States for 8 months prior to, having the blow off match of the I Quit match. And at the time we did it, we didn't even think about the significance of it, because we had done that same kind of thing, short of the chair and the eye. We had done that and more in places where it wasn't televised. So when it finally gets captured on film, and with all the intensity that led up to it, it was like we made a classic, and we didn't even realize it.
How did you two get along outside the ring? Because I was there when you got your Dan Gable Hall of Fame induction a few years ago, and it seemed like you two are still pretty close friends.
Well, so I'm married to his ex-wife. I raised four of his children that were 1, 4, 5, and 7 when Courtney and I got together, and we've got a professional respect for each other that goes without saying. But time and life and things that ensue and that we've shared vicariously because of this blended family have taken our relationship to a level that a lot of people would have a hard time understanding. But he's he's uh, he's still a consummate professional. He's been a great parent in his kid's life, and has a completely different relationship with them today than obviously he was able to have when they were young, and the family was broken up. But we still talk, and we do these. Before the COVID thing, we've done I don't know how many you know, get-togethers and one-on-ones talking about our feud. And it's like we've been tied together with this needle and thread throughout our lifetime that neither one of us would ever imagine when we met back in 1982.
I'm going to guess you probably met his wife after the divorce, which is probably why there was no heat there.
Well, the thing of it is, I was at their wedding. I've known them since they were dating, and their relationship had taken a downward spiral before I became a factor in the equation. But I mean, it's still in the very beginning. Made for some awkward moments. Certainly just out of the sheer mechanics of it. But yeah, we go way back. Something about when you get this wrestling DNA and in this fraternity ingrained in you, it truly is for life. And I think when you form the kinds of bonds that he and I did, Dusty and I did, it transcends almost all other life events.
Now, I was there in Iowa, as I said, when you were inducted, and there was a Four Horsemen, I guess, panel that day. And when they were bringing up the accident that you had, I could see the pain in Tully when he was talking about it and all of those guys. And I recently interviewed Barry Darso, who was in the territory at the time, and he said it was hard on everybody because it could have happened to anybody. Um, could you just kind of go over what happened with that terrible accident and how you remained so strong and have become such a success afterwards?
Yeah, it was a freak thing, and to your first point, it could have happened to anybody, any of us at any time. I mean, we all lived life in the fast lane. We traveled, we worked 300, 45 days plus a year, and traveled in cars and airplanes all the time. I had near misses and what could have been a plane crash. Lots of things happened, and on that particular occasion, you know, frankly, uh, I had a 911 turbo Porsche. It was like my dream car from the time I was a teenager, and the car was extremely fast, extremely nimble, gave you this crazy confidence you could do anything in it. And I was 5 minutes from my house, and I was driving 50 miles an hour, but I was on a wet road. And frankly, on that wet road at that time of night, in the conditions, I should have been driving about 30 miles an hour to have been safe. But at 50, I hit some water in right in the middle of a corner that caused the car to hydroplane, lost control of it, broadside a telephone pole. My head hits the roof because I'm so big in this little bitty car. C5 vertebrae explodes. I'm instantaneously paralyzed. Don't lose consciousness, which was a blessing and a curse. Because when they finally got to me, they were getting ready to try to pull me out of the car. I said, I can't move. And which they instantly stopped trying to pull me out of the car, cut the roof off with the jaws of life, got me stabilized, got me out of there, got me to the hospital. And all the experts said, you got 1,000,000 to 1 shot of ever walking again. You've got, just the worst injury an athlete could possibly have, and gave me a really bleak prognosis. But a host of things happened. First of all, I didn't have the good sense to understand what the medical experts were telling me. So I was stubborn. I worked my whole life to build myself into what I had become as an athlete. And so I had a determination there. But I also had I had a faith inside me, first of all, that God hadn't brought me through all I'd been through just for life as I knew it to be over with at 27 years old. So I purposed myself that I had been allowed to play this superhuman character on TV for all these many, many months and years. And that now I have an outpouring of literally hundreds of thousands of letters coming into this hospital where they had to hire more people to work the telephones to try to answer and questions and things that were coming about. And I said, win, lose, or draw, if I don't ever step foot in a ring again, I refuse to quit and to be yet another statistic for somebody to say, oh, well, he, poor pitiful him. And I wanted to do whatever it took to be the best I was going to be capable of being, to try to be an example for these people that have supported me like nothing I'd ever seen in my life. We had literally had millions of people watching this program, and now I'm getting letters from doctors, from lawyers, professionals, all people, all walks of life, and they genuinely care about Terry Allen. And so now Magnum TA has a choice. I can either become that statistic the doctors have given me this prognosis, or I can dig in and walk the walk that I talked about all these years. And that was my thing. I wanted to find out whatever the watermark was that I was able to get back to which I did walk out of the hospital 5 months later under my own power, and never regained all the physical capabilities that I once had, but ended up being blessed in a whole other set of skills that I didn't even know I had. And, so now, 2020, stepdad to 5 kids, father of 3, managed to support them and take care of them as they've grown up. And, and I'm thankful every day to God that I wake up with another opportunity to do my best every day and show people that, quitting really isn't an option. You know, you've got to persevere, and you've got to have faith. You know, I believe the good Lord had a plan for all of us, and certainly He had one way bigger than me. Than that 6 years that I was in professional wrestling, that was a magic time in my life. Yet it made up this small microcosm that we're still talking about to this day, but it doesn't make up but a very small part of the man that I feel like I've become.
You continued on in the wrestling business a little bit after, and then I guess you went into other domains. What made you get out of the wrestling business?
It was a very weird place to be at 28, to be someone who should still be a performer and still be in the ring, utilizing those skills that I had worked on so hard, where I had all the head knowledge because of the years of listening to Eddie and listening to Bill Watts and watching how productions take place, and learning psychology from Dusty. I had avenues and things that I could have added and been a contributor, and that was my intent. But because an evolution had taken place between 86 and 88, where the players now were not just the performers like I had been. They were guys with huge salaries, and by lieu of having that huge salary, really didn't feel like a guy like me had anything that I could tell them, that I could offer them, and give them advice about things. And when I realized that after a couple of years of doing that I wasn't going to be able to make a difference, and I wasn't going to be able to do anything to really improve that product, it 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 was time for me to look for other avenues and something different, because it wasn't satisfying to me to just be there and get a paycheck. if I couldn't feel like I was contributing and doing something to really make it a better product, it wasn't satisfying.
And the last guy I'll ask you about today is Nikita Koloff, who you were working with, I believe, at the time of that accident.
Yeah, and I had just finished the program with Nikita, and we're very good friends to this day, and have do done multiple appearances together and signings and events and whatnot. And he's full time in the ministry work, and we're very close, very close to this day. The guy that I was actually in the program with during that period of time was Jimmy Garvin. I had my very last match with Jimmy Garvin in Greenville, South Carolina, that night in a lumberjack match. And him and his wife Patty had just come to the territory a couple months before, and I was in this like intermediary type program with Jimmy. Didn't really know where that program was going because the next step for me was to go back and get the world title from Ric Flair. But Jimmy and I are still very close friends and have been for years, and got some great memories with them too.
Do you have any social media where fans could look you up and get messages to you?
Yeah, I've got a Facebook, and of course, that taps out. Can't go so far that, and I've got a Twitter. What else do I have? Instagram. Instagram's probably the best place because Instagram's an unlimited thing. You can search me out on Instagram. It's under Magnum _TA, I think, something like that. But you can message me on Instagram, and I've got a Cameo account too that I do shout outs and answer questions or send messages to people. But as far as communicating, I keep up with the Instagram probably better than I do anything.
I know you were babyface most of your career, but finally, do you have any advice for heels out there? Because I know I used to be a heel, and I know we got a lot of heel wrestlers that watch this channel.
Well, I never actually got to work as a heel, believe it or not, and but I was a real rough babyface, and it wasn't the traditional, babyface as far as what I did in and out of the ring as far as my persona. But the thing of it is what Eddie used to tell me was kind of simple. If a heel can out wrestle a babyface, or if a heel can out fight a babyface in a straight toe to toe contest, then there's really no reason for him to be a heel unless you just don't like his personality, right? But the classic heel babyface reaction is supposed to be a babyface that frustrates the heel into taking a shortcut to get the advantage, and not to be blatant about things that bury the referee in getting your heat, or doing things that try to make you in a babyface light. A true heel is not an admirable character, and it is a role. It's a great role, and you can't have a good babyface without a good heel. They make each other. It's the dance. But when I was a babyface, the biggest part of being a babyface is not shining, it's selling. Because when you sell is when you get the people to want to make the comeback, and they want to see you win that title that's right beyond your grasp. So the heel's got to be sneaky. He's got to be devious. He's got to be willing to be cowardly. He's got to be all these things that if it's not wrapped up in your DNA to do that, sometimes it's tough. And I think that's why we've got these, like all these shades of gray today. People say, oh, well, that's just old school. You don't need to have heels and baby faces. Well, I guess what? To sell a ticket, to make somebody want to see somebody else stomp a mud hole in somebody else, you got to hate one of them and love the other one. And there's no easy way to do that unless you have heels and baby faces.
Hannibal, you hear me? This is the captain, okay? Magnum's talking about sneaky and devious people, and it gets no sneakier and more devious than you. You are taking way too much of my client Magnum TA's time, And if this is the last time I see you, it's still going to be too soon. Your time is up, Daddy. That's it.
Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP John Paz. With me today, very, very special guest, formerly known as America's Heartthrob or The Boss, of course, two-time NWA United States Heavyweight Champion. He is Mr. Magnum TA. Magnum, welcome to two-man power trip. Well, welcome back. How you doing?
You know what? Always a pleasure to talk to you guys.
So what's going on in your world? What's the kind of the latest? What have you been up to?
Well, the latest is Greg Gagne and Steve Rosenthal are like running me crazy because I have a full-time job in the telecom industry that takes up like more hours in the day than I have time to do it, and I've been hastily working on in the background on Power Town Wrestling with those guys, promoting the series one of our first line of figures depicting the legends of wrestling, and it's quite an adventure.
That is awesome. How did like that all happen? How did it all come about? Because the figures look amazing.
Well, that's a testimony to amazing, talented sculptors that Steve Rosenthal had brought into the group from his past history. A fellow named Andy Frank, who is world class in doing those 3D sculptures. So the guys approached me basically a year ago last June and asked me if I'd like to be part of a collectible series they were doing on Legends of Wrestling, and I was flattered to be asked. And Greg and I are old friends, so I've jumped on board to have them do some memorabilia for me. And the next thing I knew, I was involved in bigger talks about the grand scheme of things and the potential of how large an audience there was out there that would appreciate this, and also the large number of people that Greg and I both knew that could benefit by being part of this roster and this team.
Man, they just look unreal. When I first saw them, I was like, it's probably not real. Like, I don't know if they'll be able to get it, but it is real and they're amazing.
Well, I'm always one of those, the proofs in the pudding kind of guys. I'm as I saw it unfold and develop and what they were creating, I started getting excited about it. Then when I saw the detail we were going into with the intricacies of the jackets and the vests and the robes and the belts, and then I really got interested because I know the authenticity part of it is such a in demand piece for the true connoisseur kind of these things. So we reached out to Dave Milliken, who owns the rights to all the Reggie Park designs for over the years, and we got into a working agreement with him to authenticate and license what we were doing of the belts that Reggie had his hands on, and it just keeps it keeps morphing into this bigger and bigger thing. So the detail for the heads are just absolutely amazing, like something would come out of a museum piece, kind of crazy good, and the scale, the authenticity, trying to be close to the actual stature is something that I don't think anybody else has really strived for in the industry. Matter of fact, I've got a figure of Dusty and I that Mattel did, and Dusty was a good 2-3 inches shorter than me, and his figure is about makes it look like he's about 6'6" and I'm 5'10" or something. So the big boys struggle with that and keeping those things in scale too. So I think we're starting off on the right foot, trying to give a unique depiction of what can be created with modern technology today.
That's the first thing I noticed about Brody. I was like, okay, obviously he is tall, a little bit taller than Stan Hansen, but in the figure, he's a little taller than Stan Hansen. So it makes sense. It's like, wow, they nailed it on that.
Yeah, and this is the beginning. I mean, I'm sure we're going to get constructive feedback from the collectors. After we get this first series out and they get it in their hands, and we're very attuned to listening to wanting to I mean, we can't satisfy everybody's little nuance out there that might be, but nonetheless, we have a very educated consumer, and we're going to be
careful to listen to that and take advantage of those notes because it can be beneficial for everybody.
So there's going to be a not season, I guess series number 2.
Yes, there will be, good Lord willing, there'll be series 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right on along. We've got a plethora of talent and people that have made such a mark in wrestling history, all the way back to the 50s, and we're looking at all kinds of different ways to make these characters come back alive for people that don't even know their history, don't even know about them. I mean, I was a fan of wrestling when I was young and read lots of things about it, and of course, amateur wrestling before that. So I was always like researching and interested in those kind of things. And people today, the older generation, they certainly remember, but we got a whole new generation that only knows of what they can see on YouTube or the WWE network or what archives are out there. And there's a wealth of other archives, that are available to show the earliest stages of television when Greg's dad Vern was just coming on the scene as a young man and a amazing talented amateur wrestler out of the Olympics and bursting into this scene. And wrestling has helped what put television on the map. So it's some great stories to tell and a host of just bigger than life personalities that blazed a trail, laying the foundations for what folks enjoy today in quote unquote sports entertainment.
It's funny because Vern, one of the first TV stars, legit TV stars in the 50s and 60s, it's like, wow, like now there's a figure of him. People learn their history. And then even further back than him, a little bit further back, but Lou Thez, another guy, if you're a wrestling historian or a wrestling fan, you know those names very well, or you should know them very well. Two of the pillars of really what we have in wrestling today. Without them to start it off, I don't know, how the lineage kind of continues. So that's awesome. You guys have those two as two of the big names in the pack.
And there's lots of guys to honor and lots of stories to tell, and we're creating a platform to be able to share those stories and memories, with the fans as we do this. And it's going to be, it's not just going to be chronological. We'll have samplings from different eras with each run that we come out with, so it won't be like you've just got to crawl out of the 50s into the 60s. We'll be giving samplings, of each of those eras, and we've got a great representation of women, and as well as the little people that grace the big square circle with us. They used to go on tour with Andre and had some really entertaining matches, particularly in the 60s and 70s.
If you look at it, obviously it's Lou Thez, Vern Gagne, Stan Hansen, Magnum TA, yourself, Kevin Von Erich, or excuse me, Kerry Von Erich, and Brody. Did I mention Brody? So Brody,
Yeah,
Hansen. Okay, so that's the 6, right? So far.
right. So we've got three. We've got three representing the National Wrestling Alliance, and Kerry and I and Lou, and Stan and Vern and Brody are more from the AWA era. Although they all wrestled. Stan and Brody wrestled all over the world, and certainly were it made an impact in the NWA as well. But we kind of broke it up like in an association alliance kind of thing, and it's pretty cool.
Who got to pick those 6?
Well, it was a ongoing conversation because I wasn't initially cast in that first iteration. I don't even know exactly how it pivoted over to me, but there were so many names that were all over the place, and there was so many names that have been, a lot of the guys that we have that kind of in that 80s, 90s era, some of those guys had been done. So I've had the one figure that Mattel did 10 years ago, and it was not the adaptation of me where I transitioned over to the red tights and certainly didn't represent the US heavyweight title with it. So
it seemed like on paper, because of the sheer uniqueness of it, that it made sense. And Carrie and I were very much in the kind of in the mainstream at the same time in the mid '80s. We Last picture of Carrie and I was at Kaminsky Park, coincidentally enough, and Vern's big extravaganza that he did there. And I wrestled Flair for the world title on the, I'm not sure who Kerry wrestled, but that was the last picture of he and I together. And I'd known him and all his brothers and spent a lot of good time with them down in Florida and in Texas and when I was in Mid South. So a lot of mutual respect and love and kind of family kind of atmosphere between us and them.
Love the Von Erichs. Great that Kerry is a part of that because one of the all-time greats, definitely. And it's awesome that you're a part of it. I mean, you should be a part of that first set because obviously one of the all-time greats. And that's the 80s wheelhouse right there, the early 80s to mid 80s wheelhouse, you and Kerry.
Well, it built that momentum that took things, like to yet another level. I mean, obviously, I had a very untimely career-ending accident in October of '86, but I literally, from a hospital bed, watched in 5 months the whole landscape, evolve from big, huge arena business to pay-per-view business, which changed the industry completely. And we went from packing arenas and putting 10 and 12,000 people in them to being able to reach out to millions of people that were paying to see an event, worldwide. And the industry just exploded. And we owe a lot of that to Vince because Vince was pushing pushing the envelope and spreading out into new areas and creating a fan base that weren't traditional wrestling fans. And it just opened up the globe to everybody that wanted to go out and get a piece of that action.
What did you think about Vince retiring?
Well, I think he deserves to retire. He certainly, put in more time and made a, impact on the industry that'll, I don't think anybody will ever surpass what his mark and what he's done in the history books. So, I think when you've worked that hard and created as many memorable moments as he has, you deserve a little time to sit back and just enjoy it and watch the fruits of your labor out there continuing to flourish.
With that accident in October of 1986, before that happened, did you know like you were headed for the main event of Starcade? Like were you told like where you were going to be if that hadn't happened? Like what the future kind of held for you or the
The
immediate
ti-
future?
the title the title had been had totally been decided that I was going to get a run with the title. I mean, getting a run with the title and what you do with it when you get that run, we can guess about it till the cows come home. But I mean, I really felt that I was ready for the opportunity. And it was a little different than, say, Rick, when Rick first got his opportunity for the world title. He was having to travel to New Zealand and Japan and, all over the world, defending the title against everybody and their brother because there was all these territories and all these parts of the NWA. When I was being groomed to step in that role, there was really only two players in the world, and one was Jim Crockett, the other was Vince McMahon. So although I would have still had the responsibilities of that title, it would have been controlled much more strategically where I went and who I wrestled against and who I was representing, to the world, my capabilities by the Crockett's because the territories had ceased to be a power in what was going on as everything transitioned.
So did they tell you like when though? Was it definitely going to be Starcade
No,
'86?
they didn't say when, and the thing is the way Dusty and I was with Dusty every day and saw his creative vision and the way things were happening, and everybody thinks, oh, it would have been Starcade, '86, and we could have done it in a house show. I mean, it was, see, the mega show pay-per-view thing hadn't blown to the ceiling. Flair and I might have had a rematch in a Starrcade where I would have defended it back against him, and you might have just rolled on TBS, one Saturday morning with me having unbuttoning my vest, and there it would be, and if you weren't in the arena, you wouldn't have seen it because it was still that kind of mentality back there that we controlled our own destiny. We didn't have to, you know, we would control how the people perceived it and then, change the narrative after the fact. But, I don't know that it would have been the pay-per-view. It could have been, it could have been before it or after it.
To me, I'm always curious, like how it gets decided you're going to be champ. I mean, obviously, you were super over. You look like $1 million. U.S. title. Then it should be the next phase would be the world title. But does that get decided by Dusty? Is it Jim Crockett Jr.? Is it Flair saying that he's going to like? How does that all get decided? Like that you're going to be the next champ or you're the next guy?
Then at that time, the alliance was still in place. Okay, it was still a group of people that vote on it, and so I had gone to we'd had the NWA big meeting in Vegas that year, and they had me come speak at it and kind of getting folks approval and whatnot. And I think that was in the summer of '86, and I believe the Crockett's and Dusty flew me up to New York and took me out in New York and told me the decision had been made and what we were going to do. And again, we didn't talk about the where or the when. They had a different concept of the business, and it's comical to say now because obviously, we can see what Rick's gone on to do, but they didn't want a 37-year-old champion. They wanted a 20-some-year-old champion, and they wanted that to be the marquee, the one that carried the load for the business as far as representing the Crockett promotion. That's what they wanted. They wanted that youth movement. They recognized Rick's undeniable talent in his abilities, but they were already looking at him as like a quote unquote like a Jack Nicholas type, you know, uh, character and being the golden bear. They one of them called him, in always being in the mix and all those things. But as we all can tell today, as Rick has wrestled, through 5 decades, nothing would have stopped him if they had done that and and things had gone well. And that would have been the question because at the time I was a babyface and there would have been no plan to turn me heel. And, aside from Hogan being champion, it's not historical for a babyface to carry the title for long periods of time. So I was, if you noticed, I was kind of a heel babyface kind of character anyway, in that, I knocked out the president of the NWA because he, irritated me over a comment about my mom.
Yep.
And I was fringing on that, what became the Attitude Era. So I would have probably, been a more aloof type character that I would have only had an alliance with Dusty and nobody else, and I probably could have worked with different people as a result of that, and not quote unquote ever been a heel, but edgy enough that I could have gone out there and had a match with Ricky Morton or somebody like that, and had a something that stirred everybody's excitement up and say, "Ooh, that's different," and wouldn't have had to gone and nut shotted somebody or done something like that, but just the attitude of it could have carried that flavor.
Did you like being the shade of gray a little bit? Because like the boss isn't the, eat your vitamins, say your prayers kind of guy. I mean, he was a little edgy, a little bit gray, a little bit like an old Western cowboy that's not going to, listen to the sheriff in town, like that
Yeah,
kind of
because
character.
my heroes were Clint Eastwood and John Wayne and Charles Bronson, and they were always that edgy kind of character. They weren't just singing zippity doo dah and skipping around, just like yeah, I mean, and there's place for that. There's baby faces that can be that, but that wasn't, as I developed this persona and this character and then was honing it and just really, just starting to test the things that I could do. I was more and more comfortable in that fighting, brawling, scowl on my face kind of mode. And I just, it's a crying shame because I just started that program with Jimmy Garvin and Precious. And Jimmy is, oh, one of the best workers you'd ever want to be in the ring with. So, and he could talk. I mean, he could talk and make himself likable, even though you wanted to kill him at the same time, because he was just that entertaining. And Patty was perfect, one with him. And I could just imagine, what he and I could have done, had I snagged that title off of Flair, and the program I could have had with him could have been just absolutely insane, and never even got to really test the waters on that to see where it could have gone. But that was my last match, was with Jimmy in a lumberjack match in Greenville, South Carolina.
So it almost seems like he was the build up to Flair, but that wasn't said though. That just was assumed by everyone.
Yeah, and that's and that was part of the reason. It was a twofold thing. So the series with Nikita was, for me, in my mind, was my graduation test. So I'm in a program with a big, rough, rugged, intense, believable heel who who his credibility was, not even in question, but his experience was not that long in the business. So to be suddenly, at this time, I'm not quite 7 years I've been in the business, and I'm in this program, and of course we have Ivan out there that helped Nikita tremendously and guiding him. But I mean, it was just him and I in that ring, working that series, and we put some 30, 45 minute matches together that were, you know, really good work. And for me, that was my, yeah, I can. If I got to general it and it's on me, and I'm giving somebody that wants it bad, I can go out there and have a great match. And a champion's got to be able to do that. It's got to be able to go out there with anybody and have a contest that holds up and believable.
That best of seven with you and Nikita is awesome. I mean, that's one of the great like Dusty booking things because he's kind of on the come up, looks like $1 million. You're on the come up, going to be obviously building yourself way up the ladder. But like you said, he was very green. But it's one of the things that's like, okay, he's playing this Russian character. He's tied with Ivan during the Cold War. Like, so he's going to be a huge heel. And he looks like a super villain. Like, it's like he's like the perfect storm, and as long as you can carry him.
Yeah, and the thing is, and he had to have people around him that would continue that mystique. And it's like it's so weird. It was like this amazing thing that they turned him babyface when I had the tragedy deal. But how much better might it have been? And can you imagine? Can you imagine Magnum Nikita 2? This time him the U.S. champion, me the world champion, and that clash, and him still being the big monster and being staying in that character because he was not protected, in my estimation, by the heels on the other side of the fence when he went babyface to maintain him in that light. And he hadn't been through the hundreds of matches that I'd been in on top, working with really seasoned pros that may or may not want to take care of you. And if they don't want to take care of you, you need to know how to take care of yourself. And that only comes from experience. So he got thrust into, he had to completely, switch his whole deal, his gears, and go in this, superpowers, thing with this bigger than life American Dream Dusty Rhodes. And it was great, don't get me wrong, but it had that other path, kept being able to go on that linear pace that he was on with the heat that he was carrying. There's no telling, where his career would have continued to go.
Yeah, because it was almost like he wasn't quite ready for what they were going to give him, and then, like you said, like he was much better in the heel role. But then once you changed it, it does change everything. I know he ended up feuding with Flair and getting a big world title match, but he wasn't quite the same. He wasn't that
Well,
monster.
the thing is, I was 245 pounds. He was 295 pounds. I could get away with selling and fighting from the bottom up when I'm out there with guys that are 40, 50 pounds bigger than me. But he was so big that the match that stands out to me, I watched it television on home and it just shook my head. It was and no, and don't take this wrong against anybody I'm talking about because it just is what it is. But he was in a match with Mike Rotundo on television, and I was watching the match, and Mike, great amateur wrestler out of Syracuse. I mean, great hand, experienced, everything. He was in the varsity club, of course, and I don't know whether it was for the world television title or what it was, but I just looked and I said, that doesn't even look like the same guy I worked with. It doesn't even. I mean, if I just squinted my eyes and was watching this match, I would never know who that was. And they changed his in-ring, you know, air so much in being a babyface that it was just it was wasted to me because again, to me, it was that moment was great, but it would also have been great to see him go back and switch back heel and turn around and say, Tolata and drop an elbow on Dusty and put the boots to him. I mean, because he was just a great heel. I mean, just the press conference with my mom where we were there and Ivan was there at the signing and I ended up going across the table. I mean, my mom wasn't smart to the business and she sold that thing like I had just been jumped by two thugs and she didn't have a clue what to do to help.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Oh, so she wasn't smart enough at all. You never
Not at
told her.
all.
Wow.
None. Yeah. So we got a great reaction out of her.
Did they tell you not to smarten her up for that reason?
Well, it wasn't that. It was just a different time. We kayfabed. It was different. We protected the business. Didn't we didn't talk about that stuff. And and my whole family, my grandparents and uncles and just cousins and just so many people that were fans before I got in the business and then I'm in the business, you had to protect that code of honor that had gone on, back to George Hackenschmidt and those guys.
Did you ever smarten her up?
Oh, I did, of course.
Okay, all right. I
Yeah,
was gonna say
yeah.
because she probably still hated, Nikita or hated him.
No,
Yeah,
no, no, no. She, after the accident and I was out of the scene and all that stuff, she certainly was aware of, that it was a business. And I think she was thankful that, because I think there was a lot of nights that she watched me come out looking a lot the worse for wear that she wasn't sure how long I was going to be able to do that.
right. Yeah. The thing is, like with you, it's funny. Like before, you mentioned like with Flair, like okay, you're supposed to feud Flair, but I can't believe that they thought at 37 like he was too old. Like that's just crazy to me because I know in Kevin Sullivan, my buddies with him, he always says like through the 90s they were talking about how old Flair was, but I can't believe in the mid 80s they were saying that because my God, 87, 88, 89 might be his best year ever with Steamboat and Terry Funk. It's like, wow, why are they thinking he's too old? He's like Kevin always says, he's Dracula. He's not too old. He's just gonna keep wrestling and being great.
Well, they all they had to measure it by was people from the past, and nobody thought about athletes being able to maintain this spectacular level of performance you know through their 40s, much less their 50s. So it was a different era, and it was a transition coming into place for that. You know you're right. I mean, he and Terry Funk had some of the most amazing matches ever, when both of them would have been considered so far past their prime that if if Jim Hurt had had his way, they'd have both been sent to the glue factory.
Yeah, right. Isn't that crazy? And you had
Yeah.
Flair Steamboat, which was maybe the greatest wrestling feud of all time in '89. So, I mean, he wasn't old. And then, what's he, 41 at that point? 44D, I guess. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's crazy too. Even think we wouldn't have gotten that if they had their way.
Yeah. So, fitness, nutrition, modern science, whatever you want to call it, just things have lended athletes to be able to go, far past what was a prime. I mean, you look at George Foreman coming out of retirement like he did, and the noise he made in the pro boxing world. So, there's been a lot of athletes that have been able to have a career way past what was traditionally considered, you know, okay. Because even in my head, I didn't want to be out there bouncing around past, I really didn't want to do it past 30. I mean, and I was only 27, and I was already thinking, 30 years old, running around out there in your Speedos, acting like Superman is it might be a little egotistical. I don't know. I would still wanted to be doing that. I had other things I wanted to do besides just wrestle.
When you go back and you look at it, like I'm always amazed at you because it's like, wow, you're like not bitter at all. Obviously, very successful. I know you have a, I think you mentioned before, but I knew it anyway. But like the job you have is very intensive. You very successful. So I mean, it's like one of the things where not bitter at all, but you could have been. And the other side of the spectrum, Ole Anderson forever was like this bitter guy. You would think something, like something really bad happened to him. Like it's just weird to think about it. It's like, wow, Magnum's not bitter at all. Like, how do you kind of I don't know, like even me myself, if something like that happened, I'd be like, I could have been NWA world champ, or I could have been bitter, but you're not like that at all. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I got a great deal of satisfaction out of what I did. I mean, I accomplished more in a little less than 7 year window
Yeah,
than some guys that had a 30, 40 year career. And you know, I was talking to Mick Foley about this. If you have a career that you have what they have that moment, like his moment coming off the top of the cage, going through that table that people have talked about to this day. I had the I quit match with Tully that 36 years later still holds up and people still show it and study it and talk about it and it's still relevant, you know, 36 years later. And I was fortunate enough not, to have had a stellar match with and program with Wahoo McDaniels, who was arguably the greatest Native American athlete in history as far as I'm concerned, and he passed the U.S. title to me right in the middle of a sold out Charlotte Coliseum where he was legend, and then Tully, and then to have the best of seven series with Nikita. I mean, I don't know that you could feel better about it or worse about it if you'd been 15 times world heavyweight champion. Uh, I had those moments that people only dream of, where you stand in the middle of the ring and have such loud adoration coming to you. It goes like white. The noise is so deafening. It goes silent. It's so loud. And those were magic times, and it was a season of my life, and it was a memorable time, and I consider it all a blessing because the fact of the matter is, I broke my neck and paralyzed from the neck down, and I'm told my chances of ever doing anything short of being able to sit in a chair and have somebody spoon feed me for the rest of my life is 1,000,000 to 1. You know, so
wow.
everything that came above and beyond that was such a huge accomplishment that I could understand because I had to come back an inch at a time from nowhere. And I never took any of that for granted. So I'm a man of faith, and I really had to test that faith during that time because when the rubber meets the asphalt, you're going to find out if you're just a lot of talk or if you can implement those things that you've said and all those flowery words or not. And it sustained me, and I wanted to be a good example to people just not to give up in so many challenges of life. And that really is the reason why initially I did the things I did on television. I came back, worked a little bit as a manager or on the side, did color commentating, did some things, and it really wasn't because it was satisfying to me. Because I'll tell you right now, it was not. Because being young and still, knowing you should be in your prime performing, there was very little personal gratification, satisfaction in that at all. But I wanted to be out there for people to see that I hadn't just crawled in some hole, some pity pot somewhere, and that I still had a life and I still had to find my way, and that I wasn't giving up, and I was gonna maybe not triumph the way others would view what a triumph would be. To some, anything short of coming back and reclaiming, what was, quote unquote, rightfully mine and had been predestined to happen. I count it all like this huge blessing because here's the fact. I've 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 fathered 3 children and I've raised 4 additional outside of them. I've got amazing, amazing family. I got a wife that loves me, and I couldn't be where I'm at today and have done all those other things without having just a trail of travesty in my rearview mirror and regrets and time lost from family and things that were satisfying to me and applauded by possibly millions, but I could have lost my own soul in that process, and I'm really glad that I didn't.
Yeah, it's amazing, like what you were able to accomplish. Because, like you said, million in one shot.
Yeah, and sometimes ignorance is bliss. I was just hard headed enough that to me, he threw out like the gauntlet, the challenge. Oh, really? Like you've met me 5 minutes and you're telling me what I'm capable of or what the rest of my life's going to be like. And I'm thankful that I didn't have all that brain knowledge that he had because I understood how devastating what I had done to myself really was. I might not have just had the grit tenacity that it took just to fight my way out of intensive care for 30 days and then 4 more months of intensive, work in the hospital, overcoming blood clots and everything else. uh, you know, I mean, they didn't think I was going to make it for about the first couple of weeks, much less walk out ever.
Man, scary stuff. So basically, it was it raining that night, like when the accident
It,
happened,
it,
or
it was rain. It was raining cats and dogs.
oh, was it?
And the bottom line is I tell people, because by likes, say, oh well, they were saying was alcohol involved, this involved, and I said nothing was involved. Eh, the honest truth of the fact is I was driving too fast for the conditions. The car hydroplaned. Had it been going 15, 20 miles an hour slower, it wouldn't have happened. But I was just so accustomed, to living life in the fast lane and driving. I've driven millions of miles, literally, all over the country through horrible storms and everything else. And I wasn't taking that extra precaution and care that I probably ordinarily would have done because it was only a few minutes from my house. So I wasn't even, my mind was on autopilot like a horse heading to the barn. I was on a path I'd been on hundreds of times, and I was going to be there in just a few minutes, and boom, it just happened literally in the blink of an eye, and I never lost consciousness, and it was just the most surreal thing that I can remember much too vividly here, 36 years later, than than you would like.
Right? Yeah, that's so scary. My God, like you said, you're hard headed, you're tough, but man, just one of those things you just don't know what's going on. It's pretty scary.
Yeah.
I got to ask you about Tully, though. I know we're talking about some serious stuff, but let's talk about some happy stuff. What is the relationship like, or really, what was it like then? Because it seemed like there's got to be something there. Because you guys brawling, yes, there's been brawls before. There's been I quit matches and stuff, but I mean, that's like the holy grail of them. You know what I mean? It seems like, man, these two must really hate each other. It's like that kind of thing.
Well, the thing, Tully and I met. I met after I'd been in the business 6 months, and I went to work for his dad, Joe Blanchard, in San Antonio. And we sat and talked. And of course, Tully, he was already a seasoned, veteran when I met him. And, he told me what his desires were for the business, what he wanted to accomplish. And it was always, he wanted to be the best heel straight up in the country. And not, not to be like the heel that, secretly wanted to be the baby face and get the accolades of the people. He wanted to be the best, nastiest, most dastardly hated heel that he could possibly be. And I saw that intensity in him then, and he saw something in me back then, even though I'd only been 6 months in the business. And so when I left, left his dad and went down to Florida, and the next time Tully and I see each other is 3 years later. And in that 3 years, I've gone through a huge metamorphosis because I've been under the tutelage of Eddie Graham for a year and a half, and Dusty, and then Bill Watts and Superstar Bill Dundee, Ernie Ladd, the Midnight Express, the Butch Reed, Mr. Wrestling 2, all these people that had a hand on helping me develop this character. So as I come into to Crockett Promotions, he sees this intense version of a babyface that's equally as intense as he is as a heel, and he saw dollar signs immediately. I mean, his wheels were spinning right from the get go. How can I get he and I involved in something? So, on the heels of winning the U.S. title from Flair, and then subsequently, not that long after, Tully having Baby Doll come down dressed as a police officer, hand him a roll of quarters, and knock me out cold to win the title from me in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I just won it a couple months before from Wahoo. The heat was intense from the beginning, and every match we had was just it was a Pier 6 brawl. It was just a fight. People knew we hated each other, and they knew when they saw us, in a match, it didn't matter where it was, 7 nights a week, we had that kind of match. And we did that for 8 solid months until till we came back around to the I Quit match. So we just had, I mean, I could have wrestled him in my sleep. I mean, we had that chemistry. We were both in great shape. We could go 20, 30 minutes, like completely all out, hard as you could go. And it was just a joy. And, you don't have that kind of chemistry with, just anybody. It was a special time. And, he was the perfect foil for a very brash young, guy like Magnum was.
Did you get along behind the scenes? I know obviously chemistry inside the scenes, but did you guys get along behind the scenes?
We had very, very much mutual goals and respect for each other. We didn't travel in the same circles. Back then, kayfabe was huge, so heels and baby faces weren't ever really around each other. I mean, we saw each other, of course, in buildings where there might be a means of getting back and forth, but typically the dressing rooms were completely separated, and unless it was a closed group function that the Crockett's were putting on or something. We weren't that many social situations together.
He always says he never said I quit. He just said yes. Do you think that he really quit? Because it seemed like he
Oh
was
yeah,
quitting there.
oh
He
yeah.
was
He
quitting
he
there at
was
Dark
he
Angel.
he was yeah he was wanting out of that. I mean, and it was great because I mean it gave the heel the thing to fuss about, but you got a guy 240 plus pound guy standing over top of you with a 9-inch spike, poking in your head. You can say yes, I don't know, whatever, but it was obvious, to everybody in attendance that he wanted out of the match, and it was and again that just shows you how everything had to line up the moon and stars. I mean, we knew we were going to use a foreign object. We didn't know what it was going to be. I mean, Baby Doll just reaches under the ring, knowing there'll be something underneath there, and comes up with that wooden chair, and she's strong enough to heave it over top of that ring, in one swoop. make no doubt, she was tougher than about 80% of the men you'd ever come across. And she flings that thing over the top of the ropes, and Tully busts that chair up, and it comes up with just the nastiest looking weapon you could ever want to have. So yeah, if if you just set out to do it just like that, you probably couldn't duplicate it.
Wow, that's awesome that it was just kind of spur of the moment on the spot, because it looks like, oh, this is predetermined. He's going to break the chair and get the spike. Like, it seems like it, but it's not at all. That's wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the chair wasn't gimmick, nothing. It was just a wood folding chair like they set up around the ring, and he just grabbed an extra. She grabbed an extra one and hoisted it over there. Had to get something.
Wow, good old days of just kind of calling it in the ring, huh?
Yeah, well, and everything was back then. I mean, obviously, we knew how we were going to finish it, but we had no idea when we were doing it that it was gonna have that kind of historical impact. And I mean, because really for him and I, it was just like another night of what we were used to doing every night.
Yeah. Yep. And I feel like you and Dusty, again, I know more obviously teammates, but another guy with unbelievable chemistry. Obviously, this kind of goes beyond wrestling too. You guys were best buddies.
Yeah, we were, and we had struck up that friendship down in Florida when I worked for Championship Wrestling in Florida, and created a bond that was it was kind of like we were this connected big brother little brother kind of deal. And it's so ironic because when I when I went to Mid South to take on the role there and become Magnum TA, because that's where Magnum was born, uh, didn't know what that character really meant. Didn't know what it looked like, what he was going to do, anything other than that I had this great name that Andre the Giant had given me. So for the first 6 months that I'm there, it was a struggle, because one week they'd have me dressing up in a three-piece suit, and the next week they'd have me come out in Hawaiian shirt. The next week I'd be doing something like a punk rock outfit. They really weren't sure what to do with me, and at the time Ernie Ladd was the booker. He's the one that had brought me in because Paul Orndorff had left, opened up the spot, and gone to work for the WWE. So I've been there 6 months, and Ernie comes up to me and says, "Kid, this just isn't working like we thought it was going to, and I think you ought to go back to Florida maybe for a little bit or something." And I called Dusty up. And I said, "Man," I said, "I guess this thing isn't going to work out like I thought." And he said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well," he said, "I know you always like to ride motorcycles, because I'd ridden motorcycles since I was 16 years old." And he said, "Go buy you a Harley and come down to Florida, bring it back to Florida, and we'll have you take that Harley and ride it into the towns, and we're going to make you the lone wolf Magnum TA, different vibe, different deal." So Jim Duggan takes me down, and we go to Baton Rouge Harley Davidson, buy this brand new Harley, buy this Harley Davidson jacket, and I'm wrestling in a little town outside of Baton Rouge. So I ride up into the town on the motorcycle, and everybody's humming. All the people are just like buzzing, like some whole different cat's pulled up. And I go in the dressing room wearing that leather jacket, and everybody like looking at me completely different than they had for 6 months. Same guy coming in the door, and so I felt the whole persona changing, and I was getting ready to, do my little time and get out of there and pack my bags and go to Florida. And Bill Watts sees me and says, "Oh, no, 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 you're not going anywhere. I got big plans for you." And he brought Dundee in, whatever. But long story short, Dusty always had that vision of creating something big. And so the jacket that's represented in the figure, which had never been done, is truly a huge pivot point for me and changing just the whole vibe of what this character was all about. And it enabled me just to kind of like, Fonzie and the Happy Days back in the day, the leather jacket
Yes.
gave
Yes.
him the vibe. Well, it did the same thing to me, and it gave me, all of a sudden I started being comfortable in portraying this character that was bigger than life, that was really just a magnification of something I was very comfortable in myself, and that's what made it all happen. And Dusty was just sitting back watching it and laughing because he knew he was going to bring me back to Florida, with all that. So then he watches me have this great ride for the next year, and he in turn came to work for the Crockett's, and things didn't start out like he thought they were going to start out, and it was a little rough there. And Barry Windham had come in as the big babyface star, and they were starving. Those guys just weren't making any money, and Barry just up and left and went to New York and left them high and dry, and which was not well thought of by a lot of folks at that moment, as you can imagine.
Yep.
And Dusty calls me in the middle of the night, puts Jim Crockett on the phone with me, introduces us, and he says, if come take a chance on us, we will give you the greatest opportunity you could ever want to have in this business. And they did. They were good to their word, and I left a place that was on fire, and we were selling out every night, and I'd had my first six-figure year in the business, and to go to a place where guys weren't hardly making enough money to buy beanie weenies, and but they took care of me from day one, and they gave me the keys to the Emerald City.
And the Horsemen start, racking themselves up, becoming huge heels. And you and Dusty were great foes for the Horsemen. I mean, it just goes perfectly together.
We were, and then there was those James Boys guys. They were kind of interesting too. Uh, the our alter ego,
Yes.
America's team, and we had just started playing with all that because it was like easy. That was like, some things you had to work hard at, but that was just, him and I together was just like a magic chemistry. So, I mean, I could go in there and do the heavy lifting part of the match, and he could sell like nobody's business, and between the two of us, it was just a very unique combo. And again, it was like my big brother kind of deal. That's where we came up with the Frank and Jesse from, because he was always Frank and I was always Jesse before we ever came up with the James Boys, and that was our little code word thing. Uh, so so anyway, it was yeah, it was a great relationship. It was uh, huge impact on my career. While I was there in the ring, and then afterwards the friendship carried on for a lifetime.
Yeah, it's funny, like what happens. Obviously, you're with your career, but the relationship never changes. Like, you're in ring, but he brings you to WCW, right? And then you start working behind the scenes. So he kind of always was with you and always buddies with you. And then obviously everybody remembers that awesome moment when he teams with Nikita and you make that surprise appearance at a Crockett Cup. I mean, the emotion, the crowd. I mean, that's crazy too. So it seems like you and Dusty were always hand in hand, no matter what.
Yeah, no matter what. And I got to see him so ironically as this is, he passed away on my birthday. So I
Wow.
can't ever forget that. But the November before, we did there was an event up in New York at LaGuardia where they have a fan fest convention kind of thing annually, and my youngest son and I drove up to be a part of it, and the promoter that brought me in had brought Dusty in, so we got to sit together for about 4 hours and like really reminisce about a lot of cool things, and we got to meet my son, and just he was big. He was so huge on family. He loved his kids and his grandkids, and he really mellowed out over time, and what a great teacher he ended up being for all those kids at the NXT, because that's what he called them, his kids, because he mentored all of them. I mean, Charlotte Flair and Seth Rollins, and just countless folks that came through that system were all had the touch of Dusty put on them, and he was just amazing at helping people find what their inner mojo is to come out of your shell and be able to present this character to the world, because that's what he'd done. He'd been a study his whole life. He'd watched the great ones, and he'd taken a little from this one, a little from that one, and molded some of his own magic around it. And then he got to where he was a teacher, he could help other people find that within themselves.
With that too, obviously you're Cody's godfather. So I mean, you're literally, I mean, family, right?
Right, right. So yeah, I was there the night he was born, and I was there holding him at his christening in Tampa, Florida. So yeah, the ties with he and I, and the family, and Michelle are deep.
What do you think about your godson Cody Rhodes today? Like, what do you think about him in WWE today, kicking ass? I know he's injured, but like, what do you think about his run before AEW and then WWE and kind of blowing it up at WrestleMania?
I saw him when he had left the WWE and was working recreating himself in the indie world before AEW. And he was always so laser focused that he had a purpose, he had a plan, and he reinvented himself after he had to overcome the the characters, things that he portrayed in the WWE that he was just not happy with, and he had tried so hard to pitch them other ideas and other things to give him some depth to do something else, and they didn't see it. They didn't see him capable of it. So he's just this great story of self promotion and overcoming the quote unquote experts, and then you mold all that athleticism that he's got and his storytelling ability, and then his business mind. I mean, he's truly the triple threat. And his dad, I know, could just not be more proud of what he's gone on to do, and now Cody's a dad, and I know when he comes back from this injury, he's going to cement yet another chapter in his life and his career in the industry.
Speaking about family, how's Tessa Blanchard? How is she doing? What's the latest
She
with her?
she's doing fantastic. She has enrolled in college in San Antonio, Texas, and is working on a degree there, and still maintaining her workout regime, and still wrestling some indie things on the weekends. But Tessa's always been like a really sharp study of life, and she realizes that first of all, from a woman's perspective, 40 probably truly is the stretch. You've stretched it about as far as you comfortably want to go, and be taking bumps in the ring and putting your body through that stuff. So she saw what it takes to be on the grand stage and the big stage of it, but knows that you've got to have an end game plan, and something that's not just got you tunnel vision focused at one thing, and then one thing go wrong and you don't have anything to fall back on. So she's preparing herself for her future, and I'm really proud of her. She's in the best shape of her life, and by the time she with the things that she pre-qualified in with courses and things she'd already taken, in probably 3.5 years she'll be out and still be a young woman, and still have probably the opportunities of a lifetime in front of her, if that's still the path she wants to pursue.
As we hit the wind down, we head towards the finish here. Just give us one last big push for Power Town Wrestling, and maybe like what's next, and where everybody can find it.
Well, PowertownWrestling.com, where everybody can find it, and there is so many stories yet to be told from this venture. The rebirth of legends to a new generation, and an ongoing adaptation of what the just the amazing people that help build this industry, that is still flourishing so well today is going to be something that we're going to be able to relay to the old wrestling fans, new wrestling fans, or people that are just really interested in understanding the history of where it all came from. And in doing so, we're going to create unique lines of collectible items. The action figures are certainly, something that is going to continue in the line over and over until we've represented the people we have on this roster. But we've got other really unique things in mind that I think the fans will be excited about and be happy to be able to get their hands on. So we're thinking outside the box a little bit and try to be creative and do justice to these people that deserve to have their own reckoning in modern time. I can imagine a young Mad Dog Vachon running roughshod through the likes of the locker room of the WWE right now. It would be a thing of beauty, and I would I chuckle as I think about it. But all those guys paid their dues, paved the way, uh, and made what's happening today possible by their just hundreds of thousands of miles going up and down the road and wrestling whether they're hurt, whether they felt like it or not, and doing everything in their power to continue to entertain generation after generation of wrestling fan.
Now, for Magnum TA, when you look back at it, I know obviously the figure is going to be immortalized forever. Everybody's going to love these awesome collectible figures. They look like $1 million. But what do you think is your legacy? Like, if somebody's looking at that figure and, in the future, like, what are they going to think of Magnum TA?
I hope they'll see somebody that isn't just the sum of his exterior parts. Um, you can't measure somebody by the amount of weights they can press or the amount of dollars they've put in the bank. There's a grit that is an intangible that I've tried to be my motto my entire life to not not make excuses, but see things as challenges and embrace those challenges in a positive light. And I've done my best to do that and continue to face challenges each and every day. Some that should make me cry, but I can still find humor in them, and I apply that same philosophy each and every morning. My feet hit the floor, and I go get up and do the same thing all over again. And I just hope they see someone that was inspiring of sorts, and maybe make sure challenges look like something that you can face and overcome on your own without having to, ever think about saying I quit.
Love it. Just one final question. Do you have a favorite John Wayne movie?
True Grit was probably my favorite.
It's a good one. I love The Shootist, but True Grit's awesome as well. Where can everybody find you? Social media? I know obviously you're on Twitter and stuff, but where can everybody find you?
Well, I will eventually link it all to our Power Town website part when it gets all up and running. But I'm on Instagram. I think it's Magnum Terry Allen Magnum TA on Instagram. It's the real Magnum TA on Twitter. And goodness, I don't even look at those things so much even to know. But if you search it up, it'll be easy to tell it's me because I have a very entertaining, colorful bunch of things on my website with my kids and family and extracurricular things that we do. So I'll be easy to find.
Awesome. Well, Magnum, thank you so much for all the time today. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure as always, and thank you for all the accolades.